All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? How is it going? I am istherenoonelse, and today's video we are going to go over the Gilliam the Rogue update 32 combat preview post that was posted earlier today. Now, there's a lot of information in here. As you can see, I'll provide a link in the description if you want to go check it out. We're going to go through this. I'll read it to you guys, kind of talk about it, and then we'll have story time, and we'll kind of separate the two things because I want to knock it all out in one video and get it done with, but it will be two different topics. So let's dive into it. Greetings. It's about that time again where we have another update coming soon, even though update 31 just released on consoles last week. With a new PTS update lurking around the corner, the combat team wanted to give you all some deep dives into the spicier stuff coming with this upcoming patch. In the last update, we try to keep things simpler, with the number of changes to help combat change fatigue many have reported, but progress cannot sleep for long as we march ever forward to improving the game. Our focus in Update 32 is twofold: improving proc set balance and continuing the hybridization improvements from previous updates. These areas are the topics we've seen a significant amount of discussion on in the realms of combat balance, so we're following up to try and get better reins on both. In Update 30, we introduced item proc set scaling, which aimed to lower the ease of access of, quote, free damage and healing from them by ensuring you needed a base line of stats to make the set really stand out. While this did help significantly reduce the overbearing success of tanky builds utilizing damage-oriented stats, it also increased the amount of damage that glass cannon and more offensive-oriented builds did by a reasonable margin. This, while an intentional result, still has the issue of the power available when stacking multiple of the sets and how certain combinations are leading to very binary and unengaging gameplay. To target that issue, we're introducing a new rule set for offensive item sets that have low counterplay. Sorry, had to take a drink. Now when wearing a set that deals a burst of damage within a 4-second window, it will prevent any other use of these types of sets for 1 second. This is to deny the ability to layer multiple effects into single attacks, significantly reducing burst potential. This rule set will be explained in further detail in the PTS patch notes, and keep in mind we are open to adjusting this along the way. Now, personally, guys, I like this idea. This may sound familiar to you because I have also talked about this being a really good idea for proc sets. In general, proc sets doing a bunch of damage is only part of the problem. It's the fact that over the years, it's been the stacking of proc sets with the same conditions. In the past, the first original proc meta, Light Attack, Ransack, Bash, would proc Viper and Tremor Scale. And so you'd get the Viper burst proc with the Tremor Scale burst proc at the same time. Now, in Markarth and now, you have multiple sets that work off of heavy attacks or light attacks or damage dealt, and you get a bunch of incoming damage based off of that. There are Stamsork one-shot builds, there are Nightblade one-shot builds, all using procs for this reason because they have good synergies where they function in the same way. Having a cooldown, a global cooldown on all your proc sets to where when one fires, the other ones can't, will be good to stop that 100 to 0 burst combinations. And I like high damage in PvP. I think ganking has its place, but I think we can also agree that there are some proc sets out there that are doing a ton of damage, and so preventing them from stacking, like stacking a set like Calurians off of another light attack set, is a good look. I think this, in general, by itself, is a pretty good look. In relation to this, we're also aiming our sights on reining in some of the power creep that's been coming into the game as of late, particularly affecting PvE. The dominance of critical hits in ESO is by no means new, and despite the reduction to overall sourcing of it, we're still seeing it win out by a significant margin when compared to other stats. Rather than outright nerfing critical chance or potency, damage and healing, and hurting builds that aren't really doing more than we expect, we've decided to move forward with a hard cap to critical damage and healing. It is our hope that this keeps critical chance and potency as viable and powerful stats, but also helps open up other stat and build paths. Much like penetration stats, these will be important to prioritize up until a point, and from there, builds will want to seek out other sources of power. Okay. To tie things up in the proc set and critical topics for this update, we're also making a fairly significant adjustment that we hope the previously mentioned changes will prevent from becoming too out of hand. Proc sets that scale with your weapon or spell damage, magicka or stamina, will now once again be able to critically strike in update 32. This is a pretty big change. Proc sets can crit again. By doing this, in addition to reducing the burst potential when stacking these sets and limiting the amount they can critically strike for, we hope to give these sets some much needed love in PvE situations where they've struggled to maintain viability after the removal of their ability to critically strike in ye years of old. There will be additional balance adjustments to these values to try and prevent them from becoming best in slot, and we'll have rules on which ones can and cannot crit, so keep your eyes peeled for the list and details in the PTS patch notes. Probably the biggest change, and I have a lot to say about it. We're gonna get to this first. Aside from these changes and the usual bug fixes and less flashy global adjustments like some long overdue Dragon Knight love, we have one more big change coming to this update. As mentioned before, hybridization improvements have been a push in many updates ever since Champion Point 2.0 was released in Update 29, and it's something we're continuing with as we see a lot of the good it does. ESO has always tried to hold itself to the mantra of play the way you want, but a lot of our stats and ability calculations actively push against this concept in ways we find less than ideal. In Update 32, we're taking the next big approach to change the concept of what a hybrid is by making them all item sets grant hybrid stats. This means sets that grant weapon damage will now grant weapon and spell damage, spell penetration will be physical and spell penetration, and spell critical will be weapon and spell critical. With this change, we hope to open up builds to new abilities and ideas, make the game more digestible and understandable to new players, and empower you with choices when creating your dream build. Our focus with this upcoming PTS update will be heavily concentrated on ensuring that the item set proc adjustments with critting and prevention release in a way that improves the gameplay balance, and we'll be keeping a close eye on those topics. We look forward to seeing the myriad of discussions that pop up, as we know there will be much to theory craft and mull over. Thanks for reading, and see you in Tamriel. So, these are two big changes. First of all, let's talk about the proc sets and crit chance. I have also talked about in previous videos how I personally think it just makes sense for proc sets to crit. I think giving them crit chance back makes sense for newer players. Like, the current ESO has too many. It's kind of like the English language, right? You use I before E for all these situations except for this. This is the way the current game works. Hey, you want to purge off all these specific dots off you, but if you get Plague Break on you, you don't want to purge that. It's confusing. When you have multiple different things like that, it's confusing for new players with builds. And so having procs have crit chance makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. However, what you have to do when you do that is you have to revamp a lot of the proc sets damage, because you're basically stating that, yeah, if proc sets can crit, you could do 50 to 90% more damage on these procs. And some of these procs have a 30k tooltip, like Dark Convergence, for instance. So saying that you're going to do 60, 70% more damage with Dark Convergence when it already has a 30k tooltip is kind of ridiculous, right? And so you look at it, and it does make sense with the revamp of sets. And so it's going to be interesting. I'm not saying this is bad yet, but you can see how this could be bad. You can see if they basically say, hey, these current sets, Dark Convergence, which scales off weapon and spell damage, it can now crit. Now they're saying that there's some sets that aren't going to be impacted by this and they can't crit. Maybe Dark Convergence is one of them, but that's still a set that probably needs to be adjusted anyways. It would have been nice to see this, but I get that for the new patch, they want to talk about new things, not fixing old things. So I could totally get behind that. Also, in general, crit chance is super low in PvP. Like on my medium armor Stamcrow, I think I'm rocking 11% crit chance right now. However, the other issue is although crit chance is super low on most builds, you can bypass that. And this is the other issue with this, in my opinion, is the cooldown on proc sets is cool, but if the weapon and spell damage scaling procs can now critically strike, I would just stack it with Acuity. So I wouldn't be running 2 proc sets, I would just be running 1 proc set with Acuity to guarantee that crit and that super mega burst. So yeah, as an example, I was dueling a guy with Dark Convergence on. I was trying to 1vx, but he wanted a 1v1, and I hit him with a 16k Dark Convergence, and he was by himself. And obviously Dark Convergence can't crit right now, but if it could, we're talking about me basically one-shotting that guy with Dark Convergence. So instead of it being 16k, it's 20k plus. That is a lot of proc damage, and it's AoE. So there are some concerns here. We'll have to see what happens here. In general, the idea of critically striking isn't that big. Like, I like it, but a lot of adjustments need to be made, and I'm curious to see if those are going to happen. So yeah, Dragon Knight changes are obviously good. We've had 3 or 4 months now of no DK. Leap in Imperial City, so it would be nice to see that change. The hybridization. I think hybridization is good. So I've talked about this also. I have a hard time, like, these things can be good, and the biggest issue that I have with this thing is just not having all of the information. So all these changes, like in a vacuum, could be good. Hybridization can be good because honestly, like, they have sets out there trying to promote hybrid builds, doing things like enchants, like a weapon and spell damage enchant, so on your jewelry, would go a long ways towards this. That'd be super helpful. I disagree with hybrid stats on all sets. I think it's great to have some sets be hybrid stats. I don't think it's a good idea for all sets to be hybrid stats. And the reason that is we'll go into story time right after this, and I'll probably say this twice, but way back in Scalebreaker, this is a long time ago, they introduced Soul Trap and Entropy. And they were very powerful dots, and basically the PvE rotation for every single class in the game used Soul Trap and Entropy. And everybody was getting really high damage. It was really easy to get 100k plus DPS that patch. If you wanted to get your skins or whatever, that was the patch to do it, because everybody had damage. You just light attack, cast your dots, and away you went. Now, the problem with that, the interesting thing to me, is the response after Scalebreaker was pretty big from the PvE community, and I agree with them, but every rotation felt the same for all the classes. Not every class had their own unique feel for a parse. And so you just hop on one class and you'd weave your dots. You'd hop on another class, you'd weave your dots. And so this homogenization of a rotation made the game boring for endgame PvE players. I kind of see the same thing with the hybridization of all stats. It's one thing to provide more uniqueness and variety, and I think variety is a good thing. You do tread a line between that and having each class feel a certain way. There's something, for me, and maybe I'm wrong with this, like, this is just my opinion, of course. I'm not saying that this is a bad idea or anything. When you think of sets that some classes run, like when you think Bomber, obviously Acuity, Vicious Death, stuff like that. When you see DK, who's playing DK? We'll go on to the next one. but like, there's like Ritualist is a perfect example, right? If you look at Ritualist is perfect for a Magic and Necromancer. If you look at old sets like Silks of the Sun, Burning Spellweave, those were Magicka Dragon Knight sets. If you look at sets like Cyrodiil's Light, if you look at sets like Scathing Mage, those are Magicka Templar sets, like stuff like that. In the past, Necropotence and Crafty Alfiq was and still is like those are pretty dominant on Magsorks. Like, Magsorks ran those for a very long time, and now not a lot of these are meta anymore because it's all about Dark Convergence and Hrothgar, but there are some sets for every single class, and it kind of like a class isn't just the skills and abilities, it's also what you're wearing. It's also the unique things that amplify that specific class. And so I'm not necessarily disagreeing with it. I'm not saying it's like a super bad idea. It's just one of those things that some specialization is cool. Like, some specialization I think is cool. And so I feel like some classes are going to lose some of what makes them because of this change. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I very well could be wrong in this. Like I said, I like a lot of the sets that provide that hybridization that allow you to run it on different things. I just don't think every single set should be that way. So that's just my opinion. We're all entitled to ours. Doesn't make me right. Doesn't make you right. It's just an opinion. But yeah, let's do story time real quick. Um, Overall view of this, these changes, like I said, these changes could be good or they could be bad. I really don't know what's going to happen. We're going to have patch notes come. I've always stressed being hesitant to have strong feelings towards things like this because this is pre-PTS. This is before the PTS is live. So many things have come out around this time that have been changed before it even ever made it to live. And so there's no point in really getting worked up about stuff until we see what the actual changes are. This could go good. This could be really good changes if they do it right. It could be really nice. It also could be really bad. But for me, from my perspective, guys, I'm old in this game. I've been in this game since it came out on console. So what, 6 years now? I've been playing this game a very long time. And I've been here since these new developers have started. And so I wanted to kind of talk to you guys and kind of tell you my point of view. This is why we're having story time right now. But they basically started in Wrathstone, if I remember correctly. And Wrathstone, kind of a shitty patch, to be honest, in my opinion. Elsewhere was great. Elsewhere was one of my favorite patches ever. There are a few things bad about Elsewhere. Pirate Skeleton was way too much damage mitigation, and Harness Magicka was giving you way too much with Pirate Skeleton and Sustain. Those two things created like a very ridiculous imbalance. And so if those things got adjusted, honestly, that patch would have been really good. The patch after that, Scalebreaker, which I've already mentioned, they decided to increase dots by like 100%, all dots, while also introducing Soul Trap and Entropy. They also buffed healing by like 90%. So it was this active reactive combat thing. And so oftentimes when you're fighting a class with just class dots, it was kind of fun because health was nonstop chunking. People couldn't stay alive just because they were tanky. They had to actually heal themselves, play defensive, and all these other sorts of things because those dots wrecked everybody. The problem with Scalebreaker was Soul Trap and Entropy. It hit too hard. It was undodgeable. You ran across a group running it. After a while, everybody picked up on the fact that, hey, each of these dots does 30k dot damage over 10 seconds. If we all run on it and we run across one person and cast 10 different dots on them, they're going to die. Unless they're a Templar, they're going to die almost immediately. I was running 2 purge sets. But the class dots weren't a big deal. If they had fixed those, if they made those dots non-existent, it would have been fine. And like I talked to you about, the other issue with Scalebreaker was the homogenization of different sets, that was the other of different classes using the same skills. That was the other issue, that patch. And then we moved on. I'm not going to name every single patch because it's not that long of a story. But immediately after that patch, they did a complete 180. And they nerfed dots by like 80 or 90%. And some dots still haven't recovered. From Elsewhere, Harness Magicka still is not recovered. The only class that can really run Harness Magicka well is Magsork, and that's because they're running 2 damage shields instead of 1. And so they're able to pull it off. A lot of other classes can't pull it off anymore. And so Harness Magicka went from being one of the strongest skills in the game to completely gutted. And it still just is not very good. You don't see many people running Harness Magicka in PvP for a reason, because it's not very good. Those dots, like a lot of class dots, still have not come back from Scalebreaker. And when you see these changes over the last year, how many different times have they adjusted proc sets? 3 or 4 times now? Like procs got buffed by a lot. Procs were then buffed by Malakath. Procs were then reduced. Procs were removed from the game. Procs were now scaling off of weapon and spell damage. And now procs can crit. So over the last year, they've changed procs 3-4 times. How many different times have they changed damage mitigation through Battle Spirit? I think at 3 or 4 times. How many different times have they changed healing, the amount of healing you get in PvP? I think 3 or 4 times. It's just constantly reworking the same stuff over and over and over again. And so now, like I said, when the last patch notes came out, when they adjusted Cloak, they're probably going to address Cloak 3-4 more times over the next year. That's going to be my prediction. They just constantly tinker with these things. And so here I am. We're 2 years into this new development team, like 2.5 years. And I don't really see a direction. I don't see a direction that they're going. It's just like they constantly take one step in one direction, and then they go 1.5 steps backward in the other direction. And it's constantly, we're just kind of like, it's like we're treading water as a game. Now, I don't care if the developers disagree with what I believe the game should be. Like, if they really like these procs and they want to go forward with high damage proc sets that do quote unquote free damage, if they want to do those things and that's their belief and that's their vision for the game, that's their vision. That's great. But the yo-yoing back and forth of really high damage proc sets, eliminating proc sets from the game, acknowledging the proc sets were too much damage, and then introducing sets like Dark Convergence, Hrothgar, Plague Break, and basically saying, yeah, you thought those damage sets that did 15k damage were bad. Well, wait till you see the ones now. And so to me, I don't see a direction. I don't see the direction that they're going, because it's just like I said, they're just tinkering with different things. And at some point you have to just go, you know what? What's our core game? What is our healing? What is our percent mitigation? CP 2.0, great change, by the way. CP 2.0, fantastic. But you have to eventually hammer out like what the core value of the game is, and then start fixing other things. And until you do that, you can't fix the other stuff. You can't work on the stuff that needs fixing because you're too busy tinkering with health, percent mitigation, how proc sets function, how proc sets are going to function again, how proc sets are doing too much damage, not enough damage, constantly tinkering with core values of how the game functions, all of a sudden has you missing out on leap not working for the last 4 months, light attacks hanging, block not working. Like, you hold block, the animation shows up, block doesn't work. Weapons appearing underneath mounts. Again, just these little changes where it just looks like the quality of the game is slowly going downhill because you can't work on those things because you're working on the same thing you worked on the previous patch and the patch before. Now, I'm not saying that they're not doing work. Going through and revamping all these sets and different values is a lot of work to do. But at some point, you just got to put your freaking foot down and say, this is how it's going to be. We're going to move on to the next thing. And they just can't do it. They can't do it. They have to keep going back to this. And so my negative concern with the proc sets critting is, in none of this did they talk about Hrothgar, Dark Convergence, or the new sets. and the thought of these new sets existing in the next patch with the chance to crit is just insane to me. Like, that's just, it's such a ridiculously insane amount of damage. I've seen so many ridiculous, like, one of my buddies sent me a clip where he was in the sewers and he threw the fear rune up in the like up at one of the spawn points where there's like 10 or 12 people, bounced everybody up in the air, proc Dark Convergence, proc Vicious Death. Everybody died from the proc because it hit enough people and it did enough damage. One person died and it was just a chain effect. He didn't do anything. He didn't throw a damage skill. He threw a skill that procced a damage set. Once again, free damage that procced more free damage. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom about this. It's just like, where are we going? Where is this game going? What direction is this heading? Because it doesn't really feel like there's a direction. Like, that's the weird part. You want to see your game improve and get better, and you want to see those things. And like, Clever Alchemist doesn't work right now. You have to look at somebody for Clever Alchemist to proc. You have to look at somebody and pop a potion at their direction in order for it to work. That's not how it's supposed to function. And so you constantly have these new things happening and they're not changing. They're not getting fixed because they're retinkering with all these old things. And so I think you're eventually, like, this is what I've seen, is just the steady degradation of the overall game over the last 2 years. You have all these things that just make the game look and feel clunkier than it did 2 years ago. It just doesn't have the same smoothness and appeal that it used to have, because it just functionally doesn't work as well as it did 2 years ago. And I think part of the reason that is because it's just, that aspect is kind of getting ignored. And so I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom here. I'm just telling you guys my point of view. This is my point of view. This is my opinion after playing a long time and seeing these changes and seeing us go forward with high dots and then backwards with dots, and then seeing healing get increased, then seeing healing get diminished, and then proc sets, and then no proc sets, and then higher proc sets. And it's just constantly back and forth and back and forth. And it's like there's a difference between new and exciting things that add a different aspect to PvP and PvE, and there's introducing things that are clearly so strong that you literally run it on everything in the game, and then you just wait until the next thing, and you wait until the next patch where everything changes. And yeah, this impacts new players way more than it impacts a guy like me. I know this game really well, so when changes happen, I'm able to adapt and adjust quicker than the average player can, because I know the game better than the average player. I 1vx outnumbered PvP. You guys been on my channel, you know, you can go back and you can look. My ability to 1vx doesn't change from patch to patch. I adjust, I change, I adapt, and everything's fine from my end. Like everything, it doesn't matter. It's just, what do they want? What do we want? Can we somehow have that be the same thing and move towards it? Because right now I'm not seeing it. I just don't see it. And so, yeah, patch notes are coming out. Obviously, we'll go through the patch notes. We'll read through all of them, and hopefully things will be a little bit more positive than I was there. But yeah, it's just what I'm seeing, and I'd love to be wrong. I have no problem being wrong, but that's just my opinion, man. Yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please provide in the section below. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.